I'm Lorna Baldry, founder of Brightlink Learning. We're a learning community working with education professionals and the schools, colleges, universities and other organisations that they work in. I've been a teacher in secondary, further and higher education for over 22 years and a teaching and learning leader for about 17 of those years. I wanted to speak to you today about something that's very close to home for me and more important for you than you know. Something that impacts your children, young people, adults, their families, and therefore your learning communities, maybe without you even being aware. That's the spectrum of hypermobility related disorders, from asymptomatic hypermobility, people who are bendy but it causes them no problems, through to those with conditions like hypermobility spectrum disorders or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and what they can mean for teachers and learners. Awareness and understanding can be everything. It's so important to talk about this because it's not something that's difficult for us as educators to support our colleagues and learners with. The key things I want to encourage you to remember are that you need to be asking about needs, genuinely listening and actively responding. I know you're doing these things every day for your learners. Once you know more, you can do that for your hypermobile learners and your colleagues too. The hypermobility spectrum is something I'm using as I speak to you today as an umbrella term for a wide range of diagnoses and symptoms, all the way from being a bit bendy, what my parents or grandparents might have called being double jointed, through to symptoms and conditions that are life-altering and even life-threatening. I'm passionate about awareness and action on hypermobility because I'm a hypermobile person, and because often conditions falling within the spectrum are genetic, my daughter is too. So are my siblings and my nephew. So what does it actually mean? I'm not claiming to have any medical knowledge or expertise. I'm literally just sharing my experiences and personal insights with you. I don't speak for everyone who's hypermobile. I speak for myself as a person with hypermobility, as a parent, a teacher, and with the permission of my daughter and nephew about some of their experiences too. Hypermobility, as I and my family experience it, is about connective tissues. Our bodies make collagen and it's in every part of us. It gives our body and everything within it structural integrity and bounce back. The average person's body is producing collagen that helps it to be a bit like this elastic band. It stretches for function, but not too far. It springs back to exactly where it was. It's not easy to break. It makes changes when I want it to, but then it goes back to and holds its form. My body and some others with hypermobility related conditions produce collagen differently. It's not quite right. It's more like this blue tack. It stretches and stretches and stretches more and more. It has way more range of movement than the elastic band. It doesn't have structural integrity though. It doesn't return to its original shape. It thins, it weakens, and it breaks. Imagine that effect throughout the body, in the skin, in the muscles and the ligaments, the things that hold your joints in place, the blood vessels, all the internal organs. Think about the impact that might have, and now think how that might affect teaching and learning on a fundamental level. I'm undiagnosed as yet with any specific hypermobility disorder. I see a specialist physiotherapist and my GP is aware, but I haven't sought the official diagnosis, which takes a lot of time and money. I was diagnosed at age 8 with a degenerative bone condition that affects the knee joints due to poor circulation. Remember that my poor collagen creation means I'm not full of strong blood vessels pumping away, especially in the legs where they would have to work so hard. I was told not to stand for long, not to walk far, never to run or jump, not to participate in anything active, never to work, and the prognosis was that I would probably be unable to walk and need a wheelchair by the age of 30. Pieces of bone, I was told, in my knee were likely to break off and potentially tear something internally or form a blood clot, which could be lethal. It was really frightening as a child when, for example, a PE teacher wouldn't listen or believe and would force participation, which I worried could have serious consequences. But you'd think I'm so old that this isn't still happening, surely? Do you think so? I was a very contrary child, and some say I'm still a very contrary adult. Nobody told me what I was to do, and so I began working at 16. I've been working ever since, often several jobs at a time. I knew always that education was key to my future because it brings opportunities and choice, and I was going to need both to make sure I could have a career I loved and be physically able to do. I trained to be a lawyer and fell in love with teaching towards the end of my study, and I've been committed to education ever since. For me, hypermobility means that I fatigue easily. I dislocate or partially dislocate joints every day. In my case, my knees, hips, ribs, shoulders and fingers, sometimes my jaw and my collarbone. Sadly, I'm at the pitiful age now where even turning over in bed or grating cheese can dislodge a rib. My daughter is diagnosed with hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, a genetic disorder at the higher end of the hypermobility spectrum. The first major symptoms became apparent from a young age and increased through her teens. Although with hindsight, now that we know about Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, it's always been there. It's something you're born with and there is no cure. It often comes with other things too. And my daughter, who's now 22, also has postural orthostatic tachycardia.
My experience of education with hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome has been quite mixed. Despite always having symptoms, I wasn't diagnosed until age 19. My symptoms started at a young age and have gradually worsened over time. Now I deal with multiple partial and full joint dislocations every day, constant chronic pain, severe fatigue, digestive problems, skin issues, and POTS, which comes with its own additional symptoms. My mental health is also greatly affected. I always loved school and studying. I wanted to learn everything about everything. I love reading and science, and I'm always super organised. I do have a bit of a stationery obsession, which I'm sure some people here can relate to. Despite my love of learning, there have been some difficulties at school due to my EDS. In primary school, I struggled with PE, and on school trips, I got really out of breath and was in pain walking any more than a short distance. It was mostly put down to me being unfit and lazy, despite being an active child participating in regular activities outside of school, such as dance, which I loved. I never felt comfortable joining in with game of football at break time and was always hesitant of anything that involved running around due to the risk of injury. We weren't allowed to stay inside at break times except for in later years when we could volunteer to be door monitors, and then I was relieved to spend most break times sat inside. I tried really hard with handwriting, but it took a while for me to be allowed to use a pen, even when other people could. I know now that EDS makes it more difficult and sometimes painful for me to hold and control a pen. When I first went to high school, I had to take some time off due to an injury. I was sat cross-legged in a drama lesson, and as I put my arm down to stand up, my left shoulder dislocated. I felt like I was going to be sick. My dad picked me up and took me to the hospital where we found out what the injury was. Again, I struggled with PE. It was embarrassing because it's often seen as cool to be athletic, but I was clumsy, couldn't catch a ball, and appeared unfit because I couldn't run laps, even though I was active in other ways. I think in all my years of high school, I probably did PE about 10 times because either I was injured or unwell or too embarrassed and uncomfortable knowing people were looking at me, and then I would be in more pain and more fatigued for my classes the rest of the day and the next day too. Everyone jokes about how the stairs up to a classroom are a struggle, but there were some days when I really didn't know if I could get to the 3rd floor, and if I could get there, that I could walk back down again. When I had another serious injury in 6th form, my school were really helpful, but I still didn't know what the problem was. I had extenuating circumstances for my exams. At this point, I also had a thumb brace to wear for writing to try and help my hand pain. Since being at university and having a diagnosis, I've had much more support. Both my previous and current universities have been really great. I have lots of helpful equipment from my Disabled Students Allowance to help with studying. I use a computer for my exams, as typing is much easier for me than writing. I have extra time for exams and I get rest breaks, so if I'm having bad brain fog or I need to relocate a joint, I can have a quick break without losing exam time. I have reasonable adjustments to make sure I'm always in a classroom with lift access, and people understand I need more time to get between classes, and I may need to miss classes for appointments. I think the most important thing for students with EDS or HSD or any chronic illness or disability is for you to listen and try to understand. We live with this condition day in and day out. We know what we need, and if there is someone there to listen who is willing to learn and help, that goes a long way. Don't make a big deal out of something. For example, if someone can't participate in PE, simply give them something else to do without making them feel like it's their fault or they're an inconvenience. And most importantly, always be kind.
When my daughter suffered her first extremely severe dislocation, which caused residual damage to her body, she needed to rest the shoulder and be really careful. Bumping it again before it had been treated and somewhat healed could have resulted in permanent nerve damage and maybe even loss of the use of the arm. She was in year 7 of secondary school at the time. Her shoulder had just fallen out of joint while getting up from the floor in a drama class. Our joints don't need a trauma or enteral bump to come out of place. If everything around them isn't strong enough to hold them in, they just fall out. I spoke with the school about her needs and told them there was a worrying trend at school at the time whereby children were daring each other to knock into anyone with a sling or crutches in the corridors, laughing and running off. I explained to the tutor and head reader why this couldn't happen. The response was, there's nothing that can be done. Teachers can't be everywhere, and so my daughter would need to stay away from school for almost a month. How fortunate that she was capable and hardworking, but how sad that within our education system we couldn't help her. We moved her to a different school shortly afterwards. My nephew is 12. He was diagnosed with hypermobility spectrum disorder only a year or so ago. It was practice at that time for doctors not to diagnose anyone under 18 with a specific hypermobility disorder because children are more bendy naturally than adults. That flexibility is inherent, and if it isn't a disorder, it can just be harmless with no effects. For my nephew, he has pain in his torso and legs and fatigue. School have been asked to make some adjustments, which they did at first, but then stopped. I spoke with school to explain what it is, what it means, how it feels, and that he's a bright and thoughtful young man. He can tell you what he needs when he knows himself. His needs, all of ours, will change every day because our bodies change every day, every minute. They can move in any way, whether we want them to or not. School want a letter from the hospital, which is no problem. They want to know family history, also no problem. Now they want myself and my brother to be diagnosed in a way that children cannot before they will consider reasonable adjustments. It seems to me as a teacher that they're making an awful lot of work for themselves. He needs to sit when necessary, stand when necessary, do the parts of PE that he can on any given day, not do it when he can't, to use a lift, which they have at school, and to have someone remember when he's absent why that is, so that he doesn't need to explain himself and feel apologetic several times a day. Imagine having to explain and apologise for being you every day, several times a day. He also needs to be able to keep working when he can't attend. He wants to. He loves to learn. It's hard to give you a list of things that a person with hypermobility may need in education because we're all affected differently. We need to be treated as people fundamentally, people with self-agency and self-awareness. We need to be listened to and really heard. We need you to know us in order to work with us and to trust us. If we can't listen and act on this, a huge number of children are going to be denied their right to an education, impacting whole futures, life chances, and even life expectancy. We will be absent from school, college, or university a lot. We don't want to be, but we can't walk or breathe or risk a knock in passing. We aren't being hypochondriacs or overly sensitive. I've always been in pain. My daughter tells me that she didn't realise everyone wasn't in pain all the time until she was much older. We push through pain, fatigue, and brain fog all the time. We want to do everything. So if we're telling you we can't do something, then it's because we absolutely have to. It might make us feel inadequate, upset, cheated of an experience, isolated. We're being sensible about what we know our bodies can do. If we push them, we may be able to do what you're asking of us, but we may then be bedbound for days or even weeks as a result. The impact of our experiences on mental health for some can be extreme. You have so much to deal with as educators, so much to know, care about and act upon. Think about how much easier things could be if you could listen to someone who is knowledgeable about their own well-being, because we have to be, and who can work with you to make the most of their education. There are some things that school can do or provide. Lifts, access for wheelchairs and crutch users when necessary, the ability to sit or stand when needed, the ability to bring in cushions, heat pads or ice packs. Listen and support and always believe. Extra time for assessments. Let us be around our friends and teachers in PE, but participate only when and to what extent we can. If a child is very young, be guided by parents on how much they should be allowed to do so they don't harm themselves. Understand the trauma and re-traumatisation that people and their families go through every day. The horror of this experience can be indescribable and it can be relentless. If you have more than one person in your community, a support group would be amazing. There is some excellent information and support available via organisations such as EDS UK, and they have asked me to share this message with you. We've been developing a new website aimed at school staff. It's all about the impact of symptomatic hypermobility and EDS at school and the practical ways schools can help to support pupils. We're working with a small group of people with a background in education, and on their advice, we're looking to launch it during the first week of the summer term. There's a book that EDS UK recommends too, to use with children aged around 5 or 6. Reading it to them, or could also be used in terms of the themes of difference and disability with children aged up to 8 or 9. It's called Ezra's Extraordinary Stripes. The International Consortium on EDS and Related Disorders has a paediatric working group which is developing guidelines on diagnosis and management in children and young people. This means that some of the children you're working with may need adjustments and consideration but be unable to access a diagnosis. This needs to not be a requirement for you to support them. It also means many families are struggling, fighting to have recognition and treatment, and desperately worried about their children and their future. EDS UK have published a report following a consultation with young people with EDS and HSD in Scotland. As a result of this, they're now trying to get funding to develop a UK-wide dedicated support programme for 13 to 25-year-olds.
Invisible conditions are just as debilitating as visible ones. It's critical not to discount what you can't see. Chronic pain or dizziness are remarkably debilitating, and when a child says there's something wrong, believe it.
My daughter had more sick days than healthy children. Luckily, the local education officer called me, and once I discussed my daughter's health, she agreed not to send letters about absences. My daughter had 86% attendance, and the school wanted 97%. We also had to drop one PE lesson, as it was PE on Wednesdays and Thursdays, which led to pain, fatigue, and time off school. Dropping one day ensured my daughter had some respite from additional symptoms. It took a few letters and meetings to get the PE teacher on board to understand what my daughter could and couldn't do. For example, high impact was too much. Cross-country running and 1500 metres was out of the question, as her knees could not take that type of exercise.
In our house we have EDS, POTS, ASD and Chiari malformation. A couple of things I would like teachers to know is how EDS, which is regularly linked with ASD, affects gastrointestinal movements. It's difficult to write a letter to a teacher saying your child might need the toilet a lot today. Also the brain fog of POTS, especially when mixed with movement. Getting up and down multiple times causes dizziness. I can imagine the general anxious confusion that may come with all these things in the mix.
In primary school, I loved drama and was in plays, etc. I tried to carry on in year 7, but then stopped because I got so self-conscious. I would fall over, often for no reason, in front of people, which, as you can imagine, was mortifying. My running is basically someone else's fast walking. I couldn't do gym because I can't even do sit-ups. I had a supply PE teacher shout in my face once that I was lying and just lazy. I had another PE teacher make me run an extra lap around the field because he said I was being lazy, and he made the whole class watch, which was not fun. I wouldn't put up with it now, but I was shy and young at the time and not diagnosed, so I couldn't give a reason why I couldn't do it. I definitely think at primary level, don't shame kids who can't keep up with their peers for whatever reason. I had less problems at secondary school, but one thing I always remember is that I fiddle with everything. I know now it's because my hands hurt, but I had my pencil case confiscated so I couldn't fiddle with it, and I had to ask if I wanted anything from it. For me, the main thing I wish was different was to flag things up in a comfortable way. Kids were often flagged up for possible dyslexia or mental health problems, which is great, but if I'm falling asleep in class, constantly leaving to be sick, or nearly passing out in PE, that should also be flagged up as a possible issue and not just passed off as me being lazy.
There are some key messages that I want to leave you with and to emphasise. This is not unusual. It's very possible you have someone with hypermobility working with you in some capacity. They may not know they have themselves yet. They may know but be undiagnosed, and they may not know what they need. Always listen and always believe. Understand that being in constant pain takes a toll on the body and mind. In terms of Maslow, it makes it very difficult to learn. Don't make it difficult for yourself by requiring endless proof. Get on with the teaching and help us to get on with the learning. If we can't be there, tell us how we can stay up to date. We want to learn. Understand that unmet needs will result in behaviour consequences, maybe anger, withdrawal, and many other things. Thanks so much for listening.